So Ben, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Last time we had a great conversation about challenges entrepreneurs face. And today it's a different topic, also very popular and very important to everybody. And that is personal relationships. Okay.
Fun one.
Right, it's fun one, I know. And also this is also a very big topic, and it's impossible to talk about this, every issues, but I'll pick one or two. My question is, in relationships, right, your girlfriend or boyfriend, husband, and those type of relationships, and when you first get together with somebody or just married or something, right, you are trying to change the other person or reshape them, or maybe just try to move them to the direction you want them to be, right? But sometimes if you push too hard, they resist, right? And then if you don't push too hard, say, why does he do that, not this? I want him more like this, I want him to be, more caring. I want him to listen to me. I want him to, take off the socks before he goes to the bed, blah, 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 all this stuff, right? So there's like kind of a change, I think especially women, right? Women like to change their husband or their boyfriend to the way they want it. How much you want to push that?
This will be a fun one. One of the biggest complaints of all men is she's trying to change me.
Oh, really?
It's one of the
the
biggest one that men, she's trying to change me. She's not accepting who I am, right? But if the man starts changing, and obviously there's some sort of compromises here and there, but ultimately if you want to have a really flourishing relationship, you need to do the same as when you first started in the relationship. So when people first meet, it's lovely, it's amazing.
Right. Everything is rosy.
Oh, it's rosy, right?
Excitement.
Correct.
Too.
And they're brushing their teeth and they have toothpaste on their lip and you're like, oh, that's so sexy, right? But then 2 years' time, you're like, you've got something on your face, like you're disgusting. Can you clear that up?
Right. So annoying.
Yeah, right? So we start to expect things and we start to want them to be a certain way. And then what happens is we ask them, would you mind if you could just brush your teeth properly? You take your socks off before you go into bed. And actually, one of the most important things is that people are different. But often, and a lot of women want their husband to be a certain way. However, most couples have a lot more negative interactions than positive. So, when you look into the minds of men and women, and you look into, okay, how do you influence a man? It's not through criticism. But a lot of women try to get their man to change through criticism. Because it's the same strategy they use with children.
I think maybe most women, I know in China, many women like nagging.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, why you put this over there? Why did you forget that? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Yeah.
And as a man, this is what you hear. Right? Because for guys, it's not the right strategy. So I'll give you a prime example from my relationship. So sometimes, as a guy, I forgot to put the toilet seat down. Okay, it's a common thing, we just forget.
Just forgot.
So my girlfriend was like, why do you keep forgetting? Can you please just put it down? Just put it down. And I was like, yeah, whatever. Didn't work, I just kept forgetting. Then one day, she did something very different. So I remembered out of thing, and so I put it up. And then she ran to me, she gave me a really big kiss, and she was like, thank you so much, I feel so loved when you put it off. And then she ran off. And as a guy, I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And ever since that, I've really actively done it, but it was a very different way. So in order to influence your man, it's through positive encouragement as opposed to negative criticism. Because criticism will shrink your man down and he'll avoid conflict. Correct. One of the big things that happen is a woman wants to argue or has an argument and then a guy can't handle it and walk away. I'm sure you've experienced this in your relationship. All the time, right? So there's reasons why that happens. And often men don't understand women's minds, right? So that's one big issue. And the other one is that women don't understand how best to interact with their man in a way that you can build him up.
Because actually, very good point. Yeah, sometimes I think we think the more we talk, and then they're better for them. Like they'll get it, right? If I say this 5 times, he'll get it. But then the guy said like, oh, enough, I don't want to hear, it's too much, I can't handle anymore, let me get out of here. Yeah, so it's like totally different mindset, totally different attitude.
And then the funny thing is that a woman will talk to another woman, she'll say, I've got the same problem, have you got the same thing? And then they bond about problems with their men, right? And guys don't really talk about it. They'll just go and they'll do something together and they'll be like, yeah, she's nagging, blah, blah, blah. So the important thing is to be able to, how do you manage that interaction and how do you best do it? So one of the most important things is from a woman's point of view, is for that positive encouragement.
Positive encouragement instead of a negative or criticism.
And for the people watching this that aren't sure about that, I'll take them to a quote from Einstein, which is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results.
Okay.
So if you want to get a different result in your relationship, you must do things differently. And it may seem different to begin with, and it may feel strange, but you'll find through time that you'll start to get a better result when it comes to influencing your man. Because ultimately what you want to do is to be able to influence him.
Right.
Negativity isn't the way to influence a guy.
Not the way. Interesting.
No.
Oh, wow. Very good point.
Yeah, right.
For women, because I think it's natural for us to criticize men. And also, it's natural for us trying to control the situation, right? Because we want to control the situation, but sometimes we feel it's out of our control. We can't control him, right? Why doesn't he do the thing I want him to do?
Correct.
You feel a sense of powerless. The more you feel that way, the more you want to control. Right? You're like, yeah. You start to like verbally, like, lagging or whatever, complain, and we didn't know we're actually pushing him away instead of bringing him back.
And that's why a lot of relationships in China, they lose a lot of passion. And there's not much fun because the interactions are often very negative. And what happens is people go on something called a crazy cycle. So what I mean by this is that you argue with your man and you say, why didn't you do that? And he's like, yeah, well, why didn't you do this? And then you start having arguments and it escalates and then you both leave and then you feel awful.
Right? And then you could like don't talk to each other for months.
Right, and then you're really angry. So one of the ways in which I help people with this is interrupting the pattern. So the pattern is, you're shouting at them, you're doing something negative. So some things that I get people to think about is what could you do that would be very different, that would interrupt the problems that you guys are facing. So one of the things, I talk to people all over the world, and these are some fun answers that I've had. I've had people say, well, I could just start taking my clothes off. Right? So you're arguing and then someone takes their clothes off, right? And you're like, what are you doing, right? So that's an option. But the aim is to do something radically different. Or one time is, they say, I just love you so much. I just love you so much. I just love you, right?
Oh, that's nice.
Correct, but you're getting your anger out, but saying I love you, so it confuses the conversation, right? Another one is, you go make them a cup of coffee and you say, let's start again, right? Or you have a break. Yeah, but there's cute ways to do it, and what works in one relationship won't work for others. So the important thing is to experiment and just to see what best works for you in your relationship so that you can have a more peaceful and loving relationship, which ultimately is what most people want. Right.
Because you feel more happy or healthy in a good relationships. It's good for both, So another issue related to this is, when two people have problems, you fight, you argue, one of them storm out, blah, blah, blah. And then now you're thinking about compromise, right? For a woman, right, sometimes you think, I want to compromise a little bit. I don't want to compromise too much, right? Because I don't want to give him the power too much. It's like sometimes it's like a bargain, right? And you do think about that measure, it's like a power play, right?
That's brilliant, right? So often when I look at relationships, I say there's different levels of love, okay? And the second level of love, which most people have, is trading. I'll do this for him if he does that for me. I'll give him a little bit of that, right, if he does this.
Right, compromise a little bit. Maybe he will compromise. Yeah. So how much should we give up, in relationship in terms of compromise?
Well, when people are giving something up, and that sort of language, they feel that they have to do something that they don't want to do. But actually, the reason that most relationships aren't that great is because people are withdrawing love. Because if you really love someone, you'll do anything for them.
Right.
You know what I mean? You'll just give to them.
Selfless love.
But most people don't do selfless love. They're constantly trading. And what happens is let's say we had 2 cups, and they're both half full, is you start trading love. But the issue is that sometimes, and you may have experienced this, where you try and love someone, but they don't feel loved. Right? And often this happens in relationships where you try and love them in the way that you want to be loved.
Right.
But that's not the way that they receive. So for example, you may buy them a gift. And they're happy, but what they would have preferred is to, I don't know, watch a movie.
Right, right.
Or they would have preferred to just spend some quality time together as opposed to a gift. Or instead of that, they want you to do something for you, and then you'll feel much more loved. So actually what's important is to understand some strategies with how best to love your partner. Because if you love your partner fully, and if they're loving you, you'll do anything for them.
Right, right.
But the sad thing is that what happens is the water dwindles down until there's not much left. And then you're in a stage where you don't want to do anything for them.
That's bad. That's worse.
And that's what happens when people come up with stories and they say, oh, we've grown apart. Or, you know, it's just not working. Really what's happened is they're not loving that person as best as they could. And the sad thing is that that's what happens with a lot of relationships, especially through time, because in the beginning you do everything.
Right, of course, yeah.
But in time you start thinking about yourself. You say, oh, yeah, well, you know, you didn't do that for me last time. Or
if you start calculating your giving, how much do you give, how much you want to give, that's becoming like a business trading. Yeah,
correct.
That's not healthy.
If you can learn to selflessly love your partner, then through time they'll do the same for you because of reciprocity. But most people are scared to love their partner fully because of getting hurt.
So it's like a self-defense.
Correct.
Mechanism.
And the self-defense is, you know, I'm going to make him suffer because he didn't turn up to dinner on time.
Right.
Right? He overworked and didn't come back to the children, so I'm going to do this.
Oh, that's not a good way to nourish relationships.
No, and it's quite damaging. And a lot of relationships that I have in China is, you know, literally 2 days ago, I was speaking to a woman and she says, you know, I'm really not enjoying my relationship. It's really sad. I'm really not having fun. I'm like, do you love him? Yeah, I love him, but we're just not happy. And I asked her, do you complain a lot about your husband? She said, oh, all the time. So what happens is you want to love them, but you complain about them. And often they're controversial.
Right, and actually complaining actually makes the man feel bad about himself, you know, doesn't give him confidence, doesn't make him feel good about himself, or, you know, it's damaging. It's actually damaging.
Yeah, all men want to be their woman's hero. And actually there's a really common thing in the world that people believe that men leave their woman for a younger woman because she's more pretty. And that's a really common thing, I'm sure you've heard about, right? Which actually isn't true. The reason that they leave their woman for a younger woman is because the younger woman admires them and encourages them.
She look up to him.
Adores and like looks up, and he feels like a hero.
Right. But the wife is like,
the wife's like, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Like, if you were a man, who would you spend time with?
It's very true.
So it's one of the most important things, and this is why, you know, there's a lot of affairs or issues, and that's purely because the partners aren't loving each other fully. And, you know, we've spoken a lot about women issues here, right? There's loads of issues with men that we haven't even got to speak about. You know, one of the biggest complaints of women is that, you know, he just doesn't understand me, right? I'm sure, have you had that before?
All the time, all the time.
Cool. And, you know, from a man's point of view.
He doesn't get me.
He doesn't get you, he doesn't get you. And there's loads of strategies in order to better understand that, right? A common thing that men do is when a man shares a problem with a man, he wants help, so he wants to fix it. But when a woman shares a problem with a man, she just wants to share the problem.
Right, she vents.
Correct, she vents.
Venting.
And in a guy's mind, he's like, why is she venting? This doesn't make sense. Okay, and you tell me the problem. I know the problem is business. Okay, let me help you fix this. Let me help you fix it.
Actually, that's much better, because when man does that, they're trying to change the situation. When woman does venting, she's not trying to change the situation. She just wants to let it out, and so she feels much better.
Correct.
She doesn't put everything here.
Yeah, and you know, it took me a while to start to understand that, you know, for example, I speak to my girlfriend and she'll speak to me and she'll rant on and she'll vent for 2 hours. And I'm just like, and then by the end of it, she's like, oh, I feel so much better.
Exactly.
And what's really important is to understand the difference between men and women, because our brains are completely different. Yeah, like for men, we make really big problems really small. And for women, really small problems, really big.
Yeah, exactly. Because we want them to see, you know, we want them to see, we want their attention.
Correct. You know? And actually, what guys don't know is that what women want most is a man's attention.
Attention, yes.
Yeah, that's what, and not just a little bit, all the time.
Right.
All the time.
Yeah. Exactly, and also sometimes it's small. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter, but we want to pretend it matters. So we want to see the man's reaction.
And actually, what tends to happen is a woman would prefer to get attention from her man, even if it's negative and even if they argue, than to be alone, because it's worse to be lonely and isolated than to have an argument, because at least you're interacting. Which is why often when women aren't feeling, that great, they'll have an argument with their man because at least they get some sort of connection.
Right.
Even though it's not love, it's a connection, than to feel isolated and alone.
It's very true. Yeah. Wow, so insightful. Well, so much to talk about, and I really enjoyed it. But of course, the time is limited. Okay, so looking forward to our next conversation.
Sure.
Thank you, Ben.
My pleasure.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for having me.